Hello, we're now beginning our fifth section. We're going to be talking about fabricated and recovered memories. This is one of the more controversial areas related to memory research. These types of memories typically emerge during psychotherapy sessions, often using hypnosis. They're deeply buried memories and they're supposedly being brought to the surface. I want to share two cases related to this. A bright young man, now in his 20s, was surprised when his family received a letter from his former nanny. The young man came from a wealthy family, and there had been a kidnapping attempt when he was a toddler. The nanny, who had been newly hired by the family, had valiantly defended him, using her umbrella to beat off the attackers and calling for help to chase off the two would-be kidnappers. The kidnappers were never apprehended. The family was, as expected, enormously grateful and had rewarded the nanny, not only with a secure position, but also with a gold bracelet. In the letter, the nanny's daughter wrote that her mother had recently died and had made a deathbed confession. There had been no kidnapping attempt. She needed the job. She liked the family. She thought that if they thought she had saved their child, she would be able to keep the position. She had beaten her umbrella against a tree and then raised the alarm. The daughter was letting them know what had happened and was also returning the gold bracelet. Now the young man was astonished. He had vivid memories of the kidnapping attempt. It had been a traumatic event that he had never forgotten, never quite really gotten over it. And yet he now finds out it had never happened. The young man was Jean Piaget. The second case I want to share occurred in California in 1982. A parent reported a suspicion that her son had been abused while at his daycare. Now the police, in an ill-advised decision, sent home a letter to the 200 families that had children at this daycare, telling them that their child might have been molested at school, but of course to keep things quiet as this was an ongoing investigation. The children were interviewed. Many of them shared increasingly horrific stories, building up to being taken through tunnels to dig up coffins and stabbing corpses. They were forced to participate in animal sacrifice, culminating in sacrificing a baby. They'd had to drink blood. They shared being videotaped while playing naked cowboys and Indians. Now, none of the children could show anyone where these tunnels were. No tunnels were ever found. There were no reports of missing babies. There were no reports of desecrated graves. The children were reportedly medically examined, but actually the examination was a brief interview. Certainly no videos ever surfaced. The primary evidence against the primary suspect, the owner's son, Ray Buckley, was that he possessed a graduation robe, a rubber duck, and some Playboy magazines. Now, several years, multiple trials, and much money, including the life savings of many of the accused, many of the children began to recant their statements. They shared that the interviewer had scared them, and indeed a number of inappropriate questioning and intimidation techniques had been used by the interviewer. One of the prosecuting attorneys told a child that lady scared him too. The case was ultimately dropped for lack of evidence. Oh, by the way, the original child whose mother had made the call to report the abuse was not allowed to testify. The father refused to give consent, sharing that his ex-wife, the child's mother, was, quote, crazy, and he didn't want his child caught up in this circus. The ex-wife did indeed have a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia from at least 2 psychiatrists, but she was off her medication because it didn't mix well with her alcohol habit. Now, while the majority of the children have completely recovered and they're doing fine, there remain those who are still very convinced that they had been forced to participate in satanic rituals and they had vivid memories of being abused. Their memories feel very real. So, the question now is, how easy is it to implant memories into a 4-year-old? This was a follow-up study they did with parent awareness and involvement, and they used healthy, normal 4-year-olds. This is an example of a lab experiment, by the way. The children were accepted into the study if they had never been to a circus or been to the emergency room. Mom and Dad accompanied each child into a welcoming waiting room, equipped with stuffed circus animals and play medical kits, and they left the child alone. Once the child seemed comfortable, Dave, an affable grad student, came in, complained that he was so early, and he began chatting with the child. At some point, depending on the toy choice, Dave would ask the child, "Hey, have you ever been to the circus? Have you ever been to the emergency room?" 100% of the children said no. So they then talked about it. What would it be like to go to one of these places? What might you see there? What might you do? And they began to actively play circus or ER. A week later, Mom, Dad, and child returned, and again the child was left alone. Again, Dave comes in early and renews his acquaintance with the child. At some point, Dave would say, "Hey, I remember last week how you told me all about that time you went to the circus or the emergency room." 1 in 4 children agreed and displayed vivid memories of the circus or the emergency room. Even when their parents tried to debrief and correct the faulty memory, these children remained convinced that it had happened. Well, I know what you're thinking. These are 4-year-olds. They're a few peeps shy of an Easter basket. Given time, you could convince them of just about anything. So, the experiment was repeated with Psychology 101 college freshmen. Families were interviewed. A student was accepted into the study if they had never been on a balloon ride. They were told that they were participating in a memory experiment, and they were presented with photographs from their past. They were asked to recall as much as they could about the events shown in the picture. Now, through the miracle of Photoshop, embedded in the stack of pictures of birthdays and Christmases and school graduations, etc., was a picture of the student on a balloon ride. Again, 1 in 4 had vivid memories of the balloon ride. Okay, we'll leave this section with the note that our memories are not as good as we would like to think they are. They can be created from nothing. They change over time. In general, our memories are not to be trusted. You can say that you remember. The memory is, after all, real. But it may not be a memory of something that actually happened.